Lots to talk about in the NBA, and joining me now, Chris Mannix, senior writer for Sports Illustrated. Chris, thanks for being with me as always. Let's talk about the big news of the day. A couple of points here, but let's start with Kawhi Leonard. How serious is his injury?
Well, the early reports are that it is an ACL injury of some kind. The Clippers have ruled him out for Game 5, and it's unlikely at this point that Leonard will return at any point during this series. And that's just a devastating short-term blow for the Clippers. I mean, Kawhi has been the driving force behind the Clippers' success in the first two rounds of these playoffs. And without Kawhi's performances in Games 3 and 4 of the series against Dallas, the Clippers probably don't get out of the first round. Without his incredible efforts in Games 3 and 4 of this series against Utah, Clippers might be in an insurmountable hole at this point. So to go into Game 5 against Utah without Kawhi Leonard is a huge, huge problem for the Clippers. But there's a bigger picture here. I mean, Kawhi Leonard, if it is an ACL injury, as is suspected, that could impact him significantly going into next season. And the Clippers, who already had to deal with a Kawhi contract extension this offseason, are now faced with something of an uncertain future. If Leonard is sidelined for any amount of time next year, that could seriously derail their championship chances next season, and that could be very problematic for the long-term future of the Clippers.
In the short term here, they're already missing Serge Ibaka. If they can somehow manage to survive this series, are they in trouble? Are they done? I mean, is that how important Leonard's presence is on the floor? You mentioned how many games he's saved for them so far.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think without Kawhi Leonard, it's going to be really hard for them to win this series. I mean, Paul George has played excellent in the last couple of games, and he still has a higher level, I think, even within him. But, to ask Paul George to take on all the responsibilities of Kawhi Leonard as well, the Clippers don't have great depth in terms of the wing position. You'll see probably a lot more Terrence Mann in this series. Maybe go even smaller, play Patrick Beverley more, Reggie Jackson more. Maybe Ty Lue does some different things with that lineup. But, Kawhi was a tour de force offensively and defensively in this series. So to ask him to ask the Clippers to beat a very deep Jazz team, even without Mike Conley, is asking a lot.
On the Eastern side of things, I think about Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Joel Embiid. I mean, the list goes on and on, both in the East and West, in terms of the number of injuries that we're seeing to key players. Is there something more to this, or are we just at that point in the season, we're in the playoffs, guys are a little bit beaten down, or is this unusual?
Oh, it's very unusual. And I think it's fair to attribute the rash of injuries, many of them, to the COVID situation that has caused a condensed schedule, and just the fact there's been so little practice time, and the NBA has been forced to play a lot of these 4 games in 5-night situations. That's not given players a lot of rest. Now, that's not really applicable to Kawhi Leonard, who was basically load managed for most of the season, played only 52 games during the regular season. But to other players who have had significant injuries, you can point to this season, the schedule, as being part of it. I mean, they didn't have a long training camp, just a couple of weeks, and everything has been one thing into the next with this season. So I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the NBA had to rush out this season, do it under COVID protocols, and there's been a lot of lingering issues that have affected this year.
Yeah, it's scary to think about. Let's switch gears quickly, if we can, and talk about some of the coaching news, beginning with Stan Van Gundy out after one very difficult season with New Orleans. What do you blame for the Pelicans' inconsistent play this season?
Well, it's hard to blame Stan Van Gundy for the outcome of this season when he was a new coach with a 2-week training camp and very little practice time with a young team. I mean, Stan Van Gundy was brought in because this Pelicans defense the year before was terrible. And Stan Van Gundy is known as a defensive-minded coach. And Stan did not have much time any time, to implement his defensive philosophies at the level that he wanted to do it. I mean, think about it. The Pelicans, for most of the year, were one of the worst teams at defending the three-point shot. That's a cardinal sin in today's NBA. They got a little bit better as the season went on, but they weren't very good at it statistically throughout this year. So I don't think it's entirely fair to blame Stan Van Gundy for the outcome of this year. But when you talk to people in New Orleans, it was clear that Stan Van Gundy wasn't making a strong connection with these young players, specifically with Brandon Ingram, who is one of the young stars on this Pelicans team. Zion Williamson obviously is the face of that team. The entire team is really made up of young players, and that really wasn't Stan's strength going into this year. So even though it's not his fault that this season went off the rails, there were some signs that Stan Van Gundy was not the right coach for this team.
So right call then if he can't connect with what the future of the team will essentially be.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think you should cater to players with who they want you to coach them. I mean, that never works in the NBA. But if you could see, and David Griffin, the general manager, is a very smart guy, been around, won a championship as the GM in Cleveland. If you can see that there were issues connecting with the team, then now would be the time to make a change. Now, there's a risk to this. Like Zion Williamson next year will have his third coach in 3 seasons. You want to have some consistency for young players like Zion. So whoever they hire has got to be the right person for that job and be able to stay on this job for at least 4 or 5 years to help grow this team organically.
Any early candidates for who might emerge for that coaching role? I think there's more than a handful now of head coaching vacancies across the league.
Yeah, there are a lot of coaching vacancies right now. And Teresa Weatherspoon, who is an assistant coach on that staff, I think has a good chance to land that job. The NBA's never had a female head coach, but Teresa's well-respected, well-connected with those players. Everything I said about Stan Van Gundy's inability to connect, that's not the case with Teresa. I think she's done an excellent job at forming a bond with Ingram and with Zion Williamson. So that's an outside-the-box choice, I think, that David Griffin, who has been an outside-the-box thinker in the past, could wind up looking hard at.
Scott Brooks also out at Washington, a slightly different scenario there. What ultimately led to this decision?
Well, Scott Brooks had the opportunity to come back and coach the Wizards. He just couldn't agree on a contract framework with Washington. I mean, they had discussed it for a couple of weeks now since the end of the season. I was told that Scott wanted to come back. I was told there was momentum internally to find a way to bring him back, but ultimately Scott couldn't get the deal that he was looking for. Scott was there for 5 years. I thought he did an admirable job with that group. They were beset by injuries for most of his time there. This past season, they made a significant deal, swapping out John Wall for Russell Westbrook. They dealt with some of the harshest COVID issues in the league early in the year when they lost multiple weeks of games and practice time due to COVID, but they were able to rally at the end of the season and get into the playoffs. So I thought they were trending in a good direction, but Scott had an idea of what he was valued at. The Wizards had another idea, and both these sides elected to move on. I think Scott will get another opportunity. Maybe it's this season, maybe it's in a season to come, because he is an excellent coach who has a proven track record of player development. But there was no hard feeling between Scott and the Wizards. They just couldn't agree on what the right contract would look like.
Do you think this was a decision that took the players by surprise? I mean, you mentioned Stan Van Gundy maybe not being able to connect. I think there were a couple players in Washington who said, hey, we'd like to have him back. I mean, was this something that they were surprised by?
Yeah, Russell Westbrook was leading the charge with that. I mean, Russell and Scott have had a strong bond that dates back to their days in Oklahoma City when Scott was Westbrook's first coach and the coach that basically unequivocally showed confidence in him throughout his early struggles in his career. So that was, a check in the box for bringing Scott Brooks back. But I think most of the players knew, it was Scott's last year of his contract. A lot can change. They weren't tremendously successful over the last couple of years of Brooks' tenure with the Wizards. So while it may be disappointing to a couple of players, I don't think anybody would be surprised.
We're going to bring you back again as we get deeper into the playoffs once things are set. But right now, from what you've seen up until this point, I mean, which teams are you kind of identifying as the strongest ones? I know it's tough because everybody's picking up injuries left and right, and that's shaking things up quite a bit. But I mean, who are your finals favorites as we speak here and now?
Oh, you have to be impressed by what the Suns have done through 2 rounds, though that comes with the caveat that they've had probably the most fortunate schedule of anybody up until this point. I mean, they were in some trouble before Anthony Davis's injury with the Lakers, wound up winning that series. They then go on to play the Nuggets, who were without Jamal Murray, and won that series in 4 games. Now they're going to have plenty of time to rest going into that conference finals. You have to like the position the Suns are in. But I'll say this, what the Nets did in Game 5 was nothing short of remarkable. Down Kyrie Irving And with James Harden basically a decoy in that game, to have Kevin Durant come out and play with that type of energy and have that type of performance was a sight to behold. I mean, Kevin Durant has had some incredible postseason performances dating back to his years in the finals with Golden State. But that game 5 against the Bucks might have been the best postseason performance of his career. And if the Nets can find a way to close out this Milwaukee team, get Kyrie Irving back from that ankle injury at some point, continue to see Harden recover from that hamstring injury, it's hard to bet against him. Stars win championships in this league, and the Nets, no matter what series they go into, are going to have the most stars on the floor.
What are we to make right now of the way that James Harden was used in Game 5? I mean, do you think that if they are able to survive this series, there'll be enough time in between for him to make some kind of tangible progress to be able to contribute a little bit more?
Well, it's hard to say. Hamstring injuries are among the more tricky to kind of figure out how long it's going to be affecting a player. And James Harden's hamstring injury is especially tricky because he's injured it now 3 times, that right hamstring. So there's always kind of the looming threat that Harden's hamstring could come back to haunt him and he could retweak it at some point in the postseason. But I give Harden a ton of credit. I mean, he was clearly going out there on a busted wheel. Like he was, as I said, not much more than a decoy in this game. But because he was able to be out there, facilitate, provide at least his presence out there on the floor, that opened a few things up, I think, for the Nets and opened things up for Durant in particular. So it stands to reason that every passing day, that hamstring is going to get better. But when you have that type of injury, there is always the risk, maybe even a high risk, that you're going to see a player re-injure it if he's not fully healthy.
Let's talk a little bit about the Golden State Warriors, Chris, and James Wiseman. What does his future hold with Golden State?
Well, Wiseman had an up and down rookie year, and that was to be expected. I mean, he was coming into a situation where he hadn't played much basketball over the last year plus, just played a handful of games at Memphis before he was declared ineligible. So you knew there would be a learning curve for a player like Wiseman. And now if you're Golden State, you're in a position where you have to ask, is Wiseman the right fit for this team? And does he fit the timeline of this team? I mean, if you look at Golden State, they probably have a 3-year window to win a championship. When you look at Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, all players in their early 30s at this point, can Wiseman get good enough over the next couple of years to be a championship contributor to that team? And if he can't, if you're Golden State, you really have to look to shop him. And Wiseman still has incredible value. I mean, he is a monster out there on the floor, a future 10-plus rebound per game type of guy who might be a regular double-double in the NBA. But because of that, you could maybe turn around and target a player like Bradley Beal with the Washington Wizards. Beal is someone who is entering the last year of his contract. If he turns down a contract extension from Washington, that is going to force the Wizards' hands to look to trade him. And if they do, there probably won't be too many offers more appealing than what Golden State could put together, headlined by a deal for James Wiseman. So Bob Myers has come out and said, the GM there has said they're not looking to shop James Wiseman, but if you're Golden State, you've got to start thinking about this 3-year window and your ability to win a championship in that time.
Chris, what should we make of the Lakers season that was?
It was disappointing the way it finished, but I don't think that's reason to overreact to a first-round exit, especially when you consider that they probably wouldn't have been a first-round exit if not for the injury to Anthony Davis. Now, you always conduct an autopsy on the season there, and they have a lot of big decisions to make, especially with their roster. Dennis Schroeder is a free agent. He's made it clear he wants to command a salary, most likely in the neighborhood of $20 million per year. Kyle Kuzma has a contract for next season, but the Lakers have to decide if Kuzma is the right fit alongside Davis and LeBron. And if he's not, they might have to look to go and trade him. But I don't see a big need to shake things up in Los Angeles. If they're completely healthy next season, they're probably the favorites going into the year. I mean, if LeBron is at 80, 85% of what he was this season, there's no reason to believe that this team can't finish first or second in the Western Conference. And if they do, they would be a strong favorite to win a championship once again. So the Lakers may have to spend some money this offseason, go deep into the luxury tax to re-sign Schroeder and bring back maybe Andre Drummond and others. But as long as they're willing to spend that money, I think the Lakers are still in a very good position to keep their championship window wide open.
All right, Chris Mannix, senior writer at Sports Illustrated. Thanks so much for being with us.
You got it.